Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Consequences. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin. Before we get into the show, I want to make a few announcements. Before we get into the show, I need to give a few thanks to my latest patron subscribers and donations. Laura A., Dr. S., Zia Rose, and Marie, thank you all so much for being my latest patron subscribers. Mara, thank you for your donation. Carly, Charlie, thank you so much for your donations. And finally, thank you Zoe Salas for the donation. It means so much to me. I couldn't make the show without the support of my patrons and listeners and subscribers. Okay, that's all out of me now. Let's get into the episode. May 2nd, 2016 was just like any other school day in Shiprock, New Mexico. The bus ride home was just like any other bus ride. 12-year-old Gracelynne Mike, along with her sister, 11-year-old Ashlynne, and their brother, 9-year-old Ian, got off the school bus to make the walk home. Gracelynne walked ahead while Ashlynne and Ian stayed behind to play with their cousin in a canal near the bus stop. Tom Begaye had been drinking. He was looking for trouble. He had been cruising past the school that afternoon watching the children play. When Tom saw the bus let Gracelynne, Ashlynne, and Ian off, he saw his opportunity. Gracelynne was walking alone. He approached her first to ask if she needed a ride home. She said no. He drove down the road a bit further and found Ashlynne and Ian playing with their cousin in the canal. When he asked them if they wanted a ride home, Ian and their cousin said no, but Ashlynne wanted a ride. She had hurt her foot playing. He promised they could watch a movie while they were driving home. Ashlynne was excited to see the movie too. Their cousin refused to go with them, but Ian didn't want his sister to go alone, so he reluctantly went with her. Ashlynne got in the front seat and Ian got in the back. The cousin waved as the van drove away. The last time that he saw Ashlynne, she was waving back at him. Tom drove away quickly, in the opposite direction from where the children lived. Ashlynne and Ian became frightened, and Ashlynne reached back to grab her brother's hand. Thomas finally found what he was looking for, a deserted dirt road just south of Shiprock Pinnacle. He turned on the deserted dirt road, heading farther into the desert. He stopped when he got out far enough that he thought he wouldn't be seen. He took Ashlynne out of the van and walked with her around another small hill until she was out of sight of Ian. He had a crowbar with him. After about an hour, he returned alone. He drove until he was back at the highway. He then let Ian out of the van and left him alone in the desert to find his way home. Ian ran. He tried to find his sister, but he could not find her. This is the story of Gracelynne Mike. I am Eric Carter-Landin, and this is True Consequences.
How do I begin a farewell when I still can't believe you're gone? How do I say goodbye to a part of my soul? During this difficult time, I'm trying my best to stay positive.
After getting home from school, Gracelynne became worried. Her brother and sister never made it home. Her father, Gary Mike, was at work, so she chose to call her mother, who was living in Redlands, California at the time. Gracelynne told her mother that Ashlynne and Ian hadn't come home yet, and she told her mom about the red van. She also told her mom about the man driving the van, how he had asked her if she needed a ride. Ashlynne's mother, Pamela Foster, called the Navajo Nation Police Department immediately to report her kids missing. She was put on hold and transferred several times. She was told that there was only one police officer available in Shiprock. The police department was short-staffed. Pamela jumped into action the only way that she knew how. She went to Facebook. She made phone calls and got her community moving. She recounted Gracelynne's story about how Ashlynne and Ian were playing in the canal, and she described the van with the man who had asked Gracelynne if she wanted a ride. When he returned home from work, Gary Mike filed a missing persons report for Ashlynne and Ian. This was at 6:53 p.m. About 20 minutes later, Ian was found by an older couple who were driving through the reservation. He was walking alone on the side of the road. They pulled over to help. Ian was clearly afraid. He told the couple about being kidnapped and that he didn't know what happened to his sister. He told them how the man who had taken them let him go, but he never knew what happened to Ashlynne. Cell service is spotty in that part of the desert, so the couple took Ian to the nearest Navajo Nation Police Department in Shiprock. The Navajo Nation police did not send out an Amber Alert on the children. They didn't organize a search. They didn't share information with other departments. By 8 p.m. that evening, one of Pamela's cousins, Maybelline Buck, had called the city police department in Farmington to see if the Navajo police had made them aware of the situation. She had found out about the abduction from Facebook. By this time, Ian was found, but Ashlynne was still missing. Later that evening, Maybelline went to the Farmington Police Department in person. There was a command post set up, but no one was doing anything. They had to wait for the okay from the Navajo Nation. News of the abduction of the children spread through Facebook, texts, and phone calls, and the Shiprock community came together to organize their own search party. The chapter house was transformed into a command post where search parties were organized. Bottled water was given to searches, and about 100 people came to join the search for Ashlynne. But they unfortunately had focused the search on the opposite side of the highway. Gary Mike drove the dirt roads near Shiprock Pinnacle. Ian had tried to remember where he and Ashlynne were taken, but his 9-year-old panic memory was sketchy. Ian had said that there were houses on one side, a cattle guard and cattle on the other side, as well as horses. Gary kept searching the area. After night fell, he used the light from his phone to search for Ashlynne. It would be 9:07 p.m. before the Navajo Nation finally requested an Amber Alert be sent from the FBI. There was a problem, though. Amber Alerts are typically initiated by state police, not FBI. More hours would pass before the confusion about who was supposed to initiate the Amber Alert would be cleared up. It was after midnight when an FBI agent contacted the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The center contacted New Mexico State Police, and an Amber Alert was finally initiated at 2:30 a.m. 8 hours had passed since Gary Mike had reported the children missing. A law enforcement search party found Ashlynne's body the following morning. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and beaten with a tire iron. Tom Begaye was arrested shortly after Ashlynne's body was found. He was attending a sweat lodge ceremony in her honor when the FBI arrested him. It was Ian's description of the van that led officers to Begaye. Ian would later identify Begaye as the man who abducted Ashlynne himself. Ashlynne was laid to rest on May 6, 2016. Over 3,000 people attended her funeral. Many wore yellow shirts, because yellow was one of Ashlynne's favorite colors. The color represents hope, strength, and resilience to the people of the Navajo Nation. People across the country released balloons, held vigils, and sang in remembrance of the little girl who was taken too soon. Begaye confessed to kidnapping the children and to sexually assaulting and murdering Ashlynne. His original plea was not guilty, but he changed it as part of a plea agreement. Per the agreement, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Begaye was later sentenced to life in federal prison without parole. He was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping resulting in death, 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse resulting in death, and kidnapping of a minor. He entered a plea of guilty on all 6 counts. As a small consolation, he spared the family the trauma of trial. After his sentencing, Ashlynne's family released balloons outside of the courthouse in her honor. They may not have Ashlynne, but this man would never harm another child. After Ashlynne's death, her mother, Pamela Foster, made it her mission to close the loophole that prevented an Amber Alert from being issued immediately. The Amber Alert was created as a way for law enforcement to alert the public when a child goes missing. It was named after Amber Hagerman in 1996. Amber had gone out for a bike ride and never came home. Her body was found 5 days later. The Amber Alert system wasn't activated on the reservation when Ashlynne was abducted in 2016. There had been attempts to activate it, but those attempts have failed. In 2006, a man named Jim Walters was given the task of creating an Amber Alert system for reservations across the country. It was called Amber Alert in Indian Country. In 2007, Walters and his team launched 10 pilot programs, including one on the Navajo Nation. The nation received $330,000 in federal grant money to get the program up and running. They also named a Navajo police captain as the Amber Alert coordinator. The coordinator left within 3 years, and no one was ever hired to take his place. The tribal council was unable to pass the required resolution to keep the program going. Half of the grant money was returned to the federal government, and the program never got off the ground. There were bigger issues that kept the Amber Alert system from being implemented on the Navajo Nation. Chronic underfunding that left 911 operators taking notes on legal pads and transmitting emergency calls via mobile radios. The tribal police department is responsible for huge swaths of land. Yet, being understaffed the majority of the time left them with very few officers to respond to emergencies. The Navajo Nation spans 27,000 square miles and is the largest tribal territory in the U.S. Understaffing is caused by underfunding. Tribal police are paid less than other law enforcement, which causes low morale, high turnover, and training that doesn't quite stick. Disputes with other agencies are common. County sheriffs will often be uncooperative with tribal police due to a lack of clear boundaries as far as where tribal lands end and federal lands begin. Tribes have very limited ability to make arrests on tribal land, so they are at the mercy of state and federal agencies when crimes are committed on the reservation. Tribal nations are considered sovereign. They have their own justice systems, but their ability to conduct proceedings and levy punishment is limited. Major crimes that are committed on tribal lands are usually handled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or the FBI. Either of these agencies will run the investigation and then hand the findings over to the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring charges. Many times, charges are never filed. In 2010, 2/3 of sexual assault cases that had been referred by tribal governments were never prosecuted. Child abductions on tribal lands come with a set of challenges that reach even further into the quagmire of judicial issues. Since tribal police are typically understaffed, it's usually up to a small department to organize a search and coordinate with state police to issue an alert. Sometimes, these alerts must go out over 2 or more state lines. Often, families are left to fend for themselves when it comes to organizing search parties. Of course, generational trauma between indigenous peoples and law enforcement is a reality. The mistrust of any government agency has been ingrained in indigenous people for generations, and rightly so. Native Americans are more likely to be killed by police per capita than any other racial group. The lack of training is also enmeshed in Native American traditional taboos. It takes quite a bit of background work to make the Amber Alert system viable. Trainings, information sessions, and preparedness are key to finding a child that has been abducted. Many elders refuse to talk about any negativity for fear that it will manifest in their communities. Things like child abuse and murder are not talked about directly beforehand for fear that they may happen. The bottom line in Ashlynne's case was that the Amber Alert that could have saved her life didn't. There was no protocol in place, poor communication, and no training. This should have been implemented back in 2006. 10 years later, it still hadn't been done. 2 weeks after Ashlynne's death, the New Mexico State Police sent an email to the FBI, the tribal police, and every other law enforcement agency in the state that essentially gave the protocol for issuing an Amber Alert. It read as follows, quote, "The responding agency confirms that the abduction meets the Amber Alert criteria and then contacts the state. Time is of critical importance in abduction cases. It takes considerable time on our part, approximately 40 minutes to process, to ensure the Amber Alert process is carried out. So it is crucial that New Mexico State Police be notified as quickly as possible in the early stages of any investigation." End quote. Rick Nez, who was a chapter president at the time of Ashlynne's abduction, told Esquire magazine, quote, "People want to let things be as they are, but we can no longer do that. We have to encourage other communities to identify sex offenders. We need street names. We need house numbers. We're so good about saying we're a sovereign nation, yet we don't follow up on certain things. This should be a lesson to the Navajo Nation. This is the time not to falter, but to strengthen laws." End quote. Ashlynne's mother, Pamela Foster, circulated a petition asking the Navajo Nation to reconsider its anti-death penalty position. Quote, "The laws in our criminal justice system on the reservation need to change. We need to step away from hosuji natani, which means talking things out in a good way, and let the justice system take action in prosecuting criminals to the fullest extent. However, becoming too dependent on federal government threatens the sovereignty of the First Nations. Strings are attached when the feds get involved. However, victimization also threatens the sovereignty of tribes." A month after Ashlynne's death, Amber Alert specialists traveled to the Navajo Nation to conduct training sessions. Mostly community members showed up. Very few law enforcement were there. They tried again a month later. Only a few tribal police officers came that time, and the Navajo Nation's new Amber Alert coordinator was absent from the meeting. Later that summer, 2 boys were abducted from a campground on the Navajo Nation, near Wheatfields, Arizona. This time, the nation didn't wait for the FBI to request an Amber Alert. But since they only had direct access to the network that alerts the system for Utah, the Amber Alert went out there, not in Arizona. The vehicle that the boys had been taken in was last seen heading east toward New Mexico. The boys were eventually found safe in Arizona. The process needs a lot more work, more funding, more technology upgrades, more trained dispatchers, and congressional approval for federal funding. Pamela Foster was determined to make these changes happen. She began by talking about it on Facebook, and then after connecting with other Navajo women, she began to advocate for better ways to keep women and children safe from abuse and violence. No one on the nation's administration would meet with her after her daughter's death, so she began to lobby Congress. She came to the conclusion that crimes against women and children on the reservations didn't get much attention because men dominate the tribal leadership. A man named Jim Walters helped her with the cause. In April of 2018, Senator John McCain introduced the Amber Alert in Indian Country Act, which provides more federal funding and more federal oversight for tribes to develop their own Amber Alert plans and to more easily coordinate with state programs. The bill would also mandate closer integration of state and tribal Amber Alert systems. This means that the Navajo Nation could activate an alert from across the entire reservation and beyond. Senator McCain wrote in an email to Congress, quote, "We cannot allow reservations to become safe havens for criminals intent on harming children. Our bipartisan bill will give tribes the resources they need to quickly issue Amber Alerts, help victims escape tragedy, and save lives." In November of that year, the Senate unanimously passed S.772, the Amber Alert in Indian Country Act. The House passed the bill in February with only one change. The bill was named the Gracelynne Mike Amber Alert in Indian Country Bill. On April 13th, 2019, President Trump signed the bill into law. The law provides training opportunities to improve investigative response when children go missing on reservations. It's designed to encourage better collaboration between tribal, local, state, and federal law enforcement, which will improve skills, develop policies, and create best practices to protect and safely recover endangered, missing, exploited, and abducted children. Specialized projects include training on human trafficking, child sexual exploitation, and cold case investigations. Over 700 participants from tribal law enforcement and child protection services have attended training sessions in child sex trafficking. Technical assistance and ongoing analysis of child sex trafficking and exploitation specific to youth living on reservations is also offered. Future goals include creating and expanding awareness in tribal communities on the scope and understanding of the problem of human trafficking and child exploitation, increasing the willingness and capacity of tribal officials and other tribal policy influencing tribal members to develop an understanding around the impact of human trafficking, increasing capabilities and skills of these same tribal members in how to recognize trafficking, luring and exploitation activities on the internet and social media, along with other behaviors and indicators of trafficking victims and offenders. Offering support to tribal communities in the creation and implementation of a comprehensive community approach to include community engagement, interdiction, arrest recovery, and support services for survivors. The data for missing and murdered Native American women and girls isn't accurate. Not by a long shot. The BIA reported that in 2016, approximately 4,200 missing and murdered cases had gone unsolved. Another report from the Office of Justice Programs states that between January 1st, 2009 and December 31st, 2018, 1,909 children were either missing or abducted. In 2018, John McCain said that more than 7,700 Native American children were missing. There are huge gaps in those numbers. These gaps occur because many don't report their children missing. They assume that they will be back in a few days. When children go missing, many times families won't report the child missing because a relative or other community member took them, and the family assumes that they will bring them home. Many of the missing children are neglected or abused at home, so when a child goes missing, sometimes it goes unnoticed. This was not the case in Ashlynne's disappearance. Her family did everything correctly. They reported her missing right away, and they organized their own searches. On March 3rd, 2022, Pamela Foster testified in front of the 117th Congress to tell Ashlynne's story and to address the issues that she and her family experienced when Ashlynne was kidnapped.
Women and girls. Now, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Pamela Foster of the Navajo tribe, the mother of a missing child. Then we will hear from Angel Charlie, the executive director for the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. Then we will hear from Patrice Amuka, the director of the Center for Economic Opportunity at the Independence Women's Forum. We will then hear from John Biscoff, the vice president of the Missing Children's Division at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Then we will hear from Sean Wilkinson of Gaithersburg, Maryland, and the father of a missing child. Finally, we will hear from Natalie Wilson, one of the co-founders for the Black and Missing Foundation. The witnesses will be unmuted so we can swear them in. They need to stand up, right? If you can stand up. Please raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Say I do.
I do.
Let the record show that the witnesses answered in affirmative. Thank you. And without further objection, your written statements will be made part of the record, and you can sit down. With that, Ms. Foster, you are now recognized for your testimony. You are still muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning to everybody from the subcommittee. I am honored to be here today. My name is Pamela Foster, and I am a Navajo from the Navajo Nation. On May 2nd, 2016, my children, Ian Mike and Ashlynne Mike, were kidnapped at the bus stop after school on the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. My children were abducted by a stranger and taken deep into the desert, miles from home, where Ian managed to escape, and to a great sadness, Ashlynne was brutally assaulted and murdered. With the kidnapping of my children and the horrific murder of my daughter, I felt a great injustice. It is during the events of the abduction that I found out that there were no Amber Alerts established on the Navajo Reservation. There were no 911s to call and no roadway digital signs. The tribal law enforcement did not act quickly enough and had poor communication systems and had little to no training on missing persons and child abductions. The lack of technology and infrastructure made it difficult to search for my children. Because I felt there was a slow response from tribal law enforcement, I got on social media and reached out to family and friends, asking them to share my urgent message. My community had no training regarding abductions, plus they had no idea an abduction had occurred. Myself, family, and friends reached out to law enforcement and search and rescue teams off reservation and pleaded for their help. Due to jurisdictional laws, authorities off reservations were not able to help. They had to receive word from tribal police that an abduction had occurred. This amplified the strain that we felt. That evening, Ian was found by a passerby and taken to law enforcement. After what seemed like an eternity, an Amber Alert was finally issued for Ashlynne, 12 hours after we made that first call to law enforcement. And 12 precious hours were wasted. Since the kidnapping of my children, I found out that the first 48 hours after an abduction are the most critical times to search and investigate for a missing person. As each hour passes, the likelihood that a missing person will be found decreases substantially. I began voicing my concerns about the problems that I faced during the abduction of my children, and I found other tribes were experiencing the same problem as Navajo. My daughter's death may have been prevented if there was an Amber Alert system in place at the time of her abduction. Prior to the abduction, the Navajo Nation had been given the opportunity to implement an Amber Alert system, and they failed to do so. I began advocating about the tragedy we experienced and vowed to make a difference on Indian country. I spoke about the many crimes that happen to our Indigenous people on and off Indian country: kidnapping, sexual assaults, child abuse, violence against women and girls. And I also felt the urgency to ask our leaders to locate all sexual offenders on reservations because many had not registered in the system and their whereabouts were unknown. Shortly after, I started a petition called Amber Alert in Indian Country Act to bring protection to Indigenous families and their children. And with the help of representatives from Washington, I was able to pass my bill into law. The bill was signed into law on April 13, 2018, and renamed Gracelynne Mike Amber Alert in Indian Country Act. Ashlynne's law amends the Protect Act and helps tribes to implement their own Amber Alert system, helps tribes with education and training and technological challenges encountered by tribes. We were actively implementing Amber Alert legislation directly into Indian country when COVID-19 hit. There's still a lot of reservations which need to implement the Amber Alert system, and hopefully this progress will move forward again. The dynamics of violence contributing to missing and murdered Indigenous people is immensely difficult and challenging to understand. It is important to bring to awareness to the challenges that Indigenous people face on a daily basis, to bring attention to the obstacles that can only be fixed by lawmakers like you. I am fortunate I had a large platform to share my story because there are thousands of stories that don't have the media coverage and they have been silenced by falling through the cracks of the judicial system. I hope my story can help make the changes that we desperately need. If it means my story helped to save one life, then it was worth sharing. I thank you today for my testimony, and I hope that we will be able to make much needed changes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Foster.
Angel Charlie, Executive Director of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, spoke next.
Ms. Charlie, you are now recognized for your testimony.
Guatsi Hopa, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Angel Charlie and I'm from the Pueblo of Laguna. I serve as the Executive Director of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. Today, I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about an issue that is impacting the lives of too many Indigenous peoples, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Crisis, or MMIW. Our goal at the Coalition is to build healthy families and healthy communities. We do this by enacting social change that is grounded in the principles of kinship, healing, accountability, and love. Based on these principles, I am here to share with you what we believe is at the root of inaction that our families face when seeking justice or closure to the murder or disappearance of their loved one. It is a system that is rooted in the devaluation of Indigenous lives since the onset of colonization. While some progress has been made in attempting to address this crisis, what continues to obstruct our ability to access the resources and appropriate support is the embedded bureaucracy within these well-intended solutions. Families across Indian country remain burdened with the financial cost of investigation, search, and rescue. The system responses created to date have left these families unresourced, without direction, and lost within the intricacies of tribal, state, and federal bureaucracies. Last week, I spoke with a mother from Farmington, New Mexico, who was told by investigating detectives not to speak publicly about her case. But the only media coverage that keeps her daughter a priority requires that she tells her story. During Operation Lady Justice listening sessions, a family from Shiprock, New Mexico, were forced into silence because they did not have internet access, transportation to a hotspot, nor the ability to leave their community during lockdown orders. Right now, here in Washington, D.C., exists an unknown number of backlogged, untested, and unprosecuted rape kits from across Indian country. These are untraceable by tribal leadership, families, and victims. These cases remain unsolved. These examples are too common throughout our communities, and it is a failure on the part of the justice system. It is the repeated, deferred responsibility of those who have sworn to protect, declaring complications of jurisdiction or a lack of resources. This is keeping our families from having justice, but more importantly, this is keeping them from healing. Our organization knows that it is not if a Native woman will experience violence in her lifetime, but it's when. More than 85% of our women will experience it. More than half of it will be sexual violence. Yet annually, over a third of these cases are declined for prosecution, citing lack of evidence. It is the complexity of jurisdiction, the historic lack of funding, and systemic racism that continue to fuel the crisis of MMIW. The disparate treatment of Indigenous women by law enforcement and media goes unchecked, and our communities experience multiple disappearances: a disappearance from family, from community, then by the media, and then in the system. Our women are 10 times more likely to be murdered, and so we continue to ask why. Why are our lives not valued? Why are we invisible? What is clear is that our justice is caught in the limbo of bureaucracy. This is not an epidemic, this is a crisis, ongoing through time, created by the very system that now seeks to address it. Congress, the Department of Justice, and decision makers throughout Indian country have the reports outlining the violences that we face. Yet year after year, we fail to follow through with increased funding, expansion of service areas, and multi-year commitments to address the root causes of these issues. The reauthorization of VAWA remains unauthorized, where a list of tribal provisions expand oversight and thereby protection of our women and children. Recommendations from government oversight committees linger with continued inaction, and the sexual violence created by man camps and extractive industries practices continue to cause devastating impacts on our communities, adding to this crisis. In closing, I would ask the committee to remember this, that it is our communities who are left filling in the gaps of the system. It is the families and advocates who continue to show up against all odds to tell their story, demand visibility, and ensure that justice remembers their loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charlie.
Since the Ashlynne Mike and Indian Country Act was passed, 76 tribes across 26 states have implemented the Amber Alert system. Many more tribes are committed to bringing the Amber Alert system to their communities. It took 5 years for the Mike family to get a proper headstone for Ashlynne's grave. In October of last year, it finally happened. A GoFundMe account was set up in order to accomplish this. Her family donated the extra money from the GoFundMe to missing and murdered Indigenous women organizations. Kathleen Piccone, organizer of the GoFundMe for Ashlynne's headstone, was quoted on June 8, 2021. Quote, "Quick update. Ashlynne's mom was able to order a beautiful headstone for her grave, and it will be delivered sometime in October to her gravesite. Everything was completely covered thanks to your generosity. There was money left over to help her son Ian with his first year of high school. The remainder of the money has been donated to missing and murdered and Indigenous women organizations and will fund the Staying Sacred program for young Indigenous women and children in the state of Wisconsin. This program teaches young women how to spot predators online and in person, and also teaches them self-defense and many other useful things. It also provides a safe environment for them to do crafts and other activities pertaining to their culture. This program has already saved lives. If you would like to continue donating, please feel free. We will keep the GoFundMe page up, and all the monies will continue to go to MMIW. Thank you so much for your support and generosity, and God bless." End quote. Ashlynne is remembered by her brother as a kind, gentle sister who ran her fingers through his hair to help him fall asleep. She's remembered by her mother as a perfect child in every way.
I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all the love and support that we have received. Messages of love for Ashlynne and all our family have poured in from all over the world. A lot of you have supported us with your time and financially through this difficult time. Thank you. We love you, and you are a part of our family. How do I begin a farewell when I still can't believe you're gone? How do I say goodbye to a part of my soul? During this difficult time, I'm trying my best to stay positive. My sweet Ashlynne was born 11/13/2004. Our little angel, whose life was short-lived. However, her beauty and magic will linger forever in our hearts and of those whom she's touched. The day Ashlynne was born, this indescribable love, I looked into her small, hazy eyes, and I shed tears of joy. I could have sworn she smiled at me as I cuddled her in the crook of my arms. In that instant, I realized that the sparkle in her eyes was my guiding light, and her smile was my life's purpose. My, oh my, God had blessed me with an angel bundled up like a little tamale. She stole my heart, and I knew I'd never let her go. From the beginning of her life, I knew I could have a love that was so strong. When Ashlynne was an infant, I told my family what a perfect baby she was. And they said, "Yeah, wait till she turns 2. When she was 2, I told people I had the most amazing and well-behaved toddler. She ate dainty like a princess and only wore princess dresses and gave out bottomless hugs. And they said, "Yeah, wait till she hits 8. When she was 8, I told people how smart and talented and creative she was. Her laughter could be heard from miles away. She outgrew her infancy and was turning into a young lady. And as a proud mother, I bragged about how focused she was on school and that she had never had intentions of having a boyfriend. And they said, "Yeah, just wait until she turns 16. Not knowing that she would never reach that age, I continued to tell my family how great she would be. Gary and I could have never asked for a more wonderful daughter. Everything she did made us proud. She was bursting with life, vitality, and passion. It breaks my heart to know that she will never spread her wings and fly, to pursue all her dreams and live life to its fullest and have that happiness second to none. I would plead with the leaders of the Navajo Nation to please figure out a way to help our families know that tragedies like this will have their first priority. There should be no delay when emergencies arise. I want to express my gratitude to you for all your support you have shown us. You are the ones who help us get through this difficult time with your never-ending love, prayers, and encouraging words. There is no way to explain how appreciative that support has been for our family. I was so lost and felt totally hopeless, and your appearing became my salvation. On behalf of our family, I would like to thank you all for coming to attend Ashlynne's memorial services.
She's remembered by her classmates as a quiet, shy girl who was a friend to everyone. She's remembered by her community as a relative. She's remembered by the government, both tribal and federal, as the girl who established the Amber Alert in Indian country. The rest of the world will remember her as the girl who played xylophone in the school band and the girl who loved the color yellow. 11 is far too young to have one's life cut short. Ashlynne was only coming into her own. She was figuring out who she was and what she wanted to be. Her life will never be fully formed, but she will be remembered. Gracelynne Mike. Sunrise, November 13th, 2004. Sunset, May 2nd, 2016. I'd like to give special thanks to Jackie Moranty, who wrote this beautiful episode. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.